You're listening to Real Life, No Filter, where raw emotions and real moments take center stage. No masks, no filters. Just honest stories about life, love, and everything in between. Get comfortable. We're about to begin. It was a wonderful autumn day. Beneath the high blue sky, the trees, embraced by gold and crimson, radiated a soft, warm glow. The clear air was intoxicating, filled with freshness, the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. In the old park, a man sat on a bench, watching his companion, a large Labrador. The dog, with luxurious golden fur shining in the rays of the unusually bright autumn sun, was clearly enjoying himself, running back and forth across the rustling carpet of fallen leaves between the trees. Suddenly, sharply slowing down, he ran headlong into a lush pile of leaves, burying himself in it head first and raising a multicolored whirlwind around him. Crouching low, the dog froze and fixed his gaze on his owner. It seemed his eyes were saying, "Well, why are you glued to that bench? Come here, let's jump together. It's so great." The dog snorted several times, trying to free his nose from clinging cobwebs and bits of leaves, then picked up a small branch and raced towards the bench with all his might. "Well, Sam," the owner said tenderly, stroking the approaching dog on the neck and gently removing a cobweb from his muzzle. "You're playing like a puppy today." The dog lifted his head, and his large, shiny eyes stared into the man's face. His tail wagged furiously, his whole body trembling impatiently. Sam sat down, lifted a paw, and looking questioningly at the man, whimpered softly. "Calm down," the man laughed cheerfully. "What's this attack of youth? Did you come here to play with me?" "No, I can't. It'll pass later. Others will be jumping then, but around me." The man laughed softly again, but this time there was bitterness in his laughter. "If only Johnny were here with us, he would have run with you." The man suddenly fell silent, his face contorted as if in pain, and he added, forcing the words out with difficulty, "And if Liz were here with us, I'm sure she would have jumped with you. I remember all your tricks. It was her, Elizabeth, who taught you, wasn't it?" The dog, hearing the sounds of his beloved voice and familiar names, yelped, wagged his tail furiously, and sat down next to the bench, still holding the broken branch in his teeth. Evidently, he hadn't given up hope of involving his owner in a fun game. However, he was clearly happy just sitting nearby and feeling the touch of a hand. The man, continuing to automatically stroke the dog's head and habitually running his fingers through his silky ears, inhaled the delicious, fresh autumn air with pleasure and closed his eyes. Memories, joyful and bitter, bright and sad, suddenly flooded over him. Their family wasn't particularly wealthy. His mother had worked as a librarian all her life and joked with slight bitterness that, fortunately, she had managed to retire before the internet destroyed all libraries. His father was a foreman at a factory and spent his rare free time rustling newspapers, squinting suspiciously at his wife, and demanding good grades from his son. Rob loved his mother dearly and was a little afraid of his father, though he loved him with some strange, forced love. George remained a stranger to his son, someone he didn't understand and who wasn't kind. It was terrible, but Rob could never change his attitude towards his father. Perhaps as he grew older, the boy might have been able to understand his relative better, to build a connection. But there wasn't enough time for that. George passed away suddenly. 9-year-old Rob was left with his mother, who, after George's death, grieved as if she had lost not a gloomy, perpetually dissatisfied husband who constantly suspected her of some mythical infidelities, but the most beloved man. After school, Robert enrolled in an engineering institute. Soon he doubted the correctness of his choice. A relative helped out, his mother's brother. Uncle Peter had a small car repair shop in his garage where he fixed and resold cars. All that fluff, those lawyer types and traders, they're needed today, but not tomorrow. He rumbled in his smoky bass, listening to his nephew. And what kind of work is that, God forgive me, for a real man, shuffling papers and swindling others? Pfft. But with me, it's real work, a man's work. Uncle Peter proudly straightened up and began pounding his chest with a very impressive fist, bearing traces of permanently ingrained motor oil. And I'll always have clients and work. I'll always earn a piece of bread and butter, and if I want, with caviar. And you, Robbie, come to me. I'll set you up with the trade. You'll start doing what they drone on about in theory at your institutes. Plus, you'll start earning some money. Stop living off your mother. This was an argument, and a very weighty one. Rob had been trying to earn some money here and there for a long time, but all of it, along with his mother's modest pension and his even more modest student stipend, was barely enough to live on. Things immediately clicked for Rob with the work at his uncle's shop. He turned out to be a person with an innate technical intuition and grasp. He was interested in everything he saw and did, and he wanted to know and be able to do even more. "Yes, Robbie, your hands certainly grow from the right place," his uncle would say. "With these hands and more brains, you'll be priceless. Keep studying," he would shout sternly for educational purposes. Rob studied easily, with pleasure. In the evenings and on weekends, he worked at the workshop, quickly gaining practical experience. After just a year, he was calmly entrusted with independent repairs, starting with simple cases, but over time, more responsible and complex ones. Time flew by quickly, and 5 years later, by the time he graduated from the institute, Robert Borisov was already an accomplished mechanic who, despite his youth, enjoyed solid authority among car owners, constantly worried about breakdowns. "Robbie, this is so good. I'm so happy. I'm so proud of you." His mother proudly stroked her son's brand new diploma. "This is a very good profession for a man." "Yes, Mom. You think so?" Rob looked at his mother playfully. "But if I were a lawyer now, that would be more prestigious. And my hands would be clean," he added, looking at his palms, covered in calluses, small abrasions, and indelible oil stains. "Nonsense, son, it's rubbish. My dear brother Pete talks a lot of unnecessary stuff, of course, but he's right about this. You have a wonderful man's profession." His mother smiled. "Don't laugh, Robbie, but I always thought the ideal family was when the husband is an engineer and the wife is a doctor." "Mom, you're something else." Rob burst out laughing. "Why a doctor?" "Oh, that's silly. I, for one, will definitely never, ever be able to love a woman doctor. I think they're all somehow frozen." Son and mother laughed cheerfully. They were happy. The categorical way Rob judged women doctors was not accidental. It was hard to explain, but something related to medicine caused him unpleasant feelings from early childhood. Robbie desperately resisted going to the clinic, screamed during appointments, and hid from the pediatrician called to the house. As an adult, Robert never went to doctors, being healthy and completely convinced that a cough and a runny nose were no reason to die. He habitually ignored medicine, just like seasonal colds. However, this time he couldn't avoid visiting medical institutions. He needed certificates to renew his driver's license. "Who's last?" Rob asked, approaching the office door, addressing the fellow sufferers sitting along the wall. "Not last, but next." "I am," one of them mumbled, and receiving no answer, looked up at Robert. "You'll be after me? Hey, you'll be after me. Do you hear? Man, are you deaf or something?" The man indignantly tried to attract Rob's attention. But Robert didn't hear or see anything around him except an incredible, almost unearthly creature walking, or rather floating, down the shabby clinic corridor. A magical vision in the form of a short, slender, young woman in a white coat fluttered past the frozen Rob and disappeared behind the office door. He sank onto a chair next to the angry next man in confusion and suddenly felt his heart pounding furiously. He entered the office in a semi-conscious state, glad it wasn't an appointment. A young woman sat at the desk by the window, and the sun's rays, tangled in strands of reddish hair, created a halo effect around her head. "Hello, come in, sit down," a voice that sounded angelic to Rob said. "Any complaints? Are you taking any medications?" she asked, without lifting her head, quickly writing something on the form in front of her. "What?" Rob asked stupidly, unable to take his eyes off the doctor's golden glow. "Are you taking any medications?" She lifted her head and looked carefully at his face. Rob's breath caught, blood rushed to his cheeks, and his legs trembled. What? That was all the poor man could manage. "All right, let me see your hands." She walked decisively towards Robert, who was sitting like a statue, and he caught a light, barely perceptible scent of perfume. "Roll up your shirt sleeves higher, higher, please." "Good, you can lower them. Look at me. Not like that." She reached out and gently lifted Rob's head, looking intently into his face. "Are you feeling unwell? Just don't answer, please, that—" "What?" Rob predictably said. "All right, Mr. Borisov," she said, looking at his documents. "You are behaving, to put it mildly, a little strangely. What's wrong with you?" She looked very intently at his face again. "I love you, doctor," Robert said in confusion. The doctor, Dr. Elizabeth Miller, as her badge read, froze. Her face, professionally focused, suddenly became bewildered. "Do you need this certificate that badly?" she suddenly asked quietly, sitting down next to Rob. "Yes, I'll give you the certificate, Mr. Borisov. You don't have to go to such extremes for it." "No, doctor, no. This, Dr. Miller, this isn't for the certificate. This is for life." And Robert, looking her straight in the eyes, laughed loudly. A few months later, Elizabeth and Robert got married. Robert's mother, happy, incredibly rejuvenated by this happiness, constantly caught her son's eye, and several times, unable to resist, pointed at Elizabeth with her eyes and giggled cheerfully like a girl. Their love was not like an all-consuming passion. They didn't need to be with each other every minute, every second of their lives. They didn't demand or expect sacrifices and self-denial from each other. It was enough for them that they had each other, and neither he nor she needed anything more. Though Elizabeth tried to achieve something from Rob, without success. "You know, Robbie, you really ought to be observed properly. This is no joke, you know. And you're not exactly young anymore, let's just say." "Well, you've got yourself problems," Robert grumbled. "I lived a good life, and now here you go. A medical examination at home. Liz, stop it. Everything's fine with me. And anyway, the less you know, the better you sleep." He laughed. She shook her head disapprovingly. "Words worthy of a teenager. All right, I won't force you. You're a big boy. It's your life." Elizabeth still insisted on the examination. There, they examined him at length and tediously, sat him down, laid him down, attached some clips, suction cups, and then looked at the results with a thoughtful air. In the end, they told him to avoid heavy exertion, eat less fried, smoked, spicy, and salty food. In short, everything that was tasty. However, Robert didn't delve into the details at all. The main thing for him was to calm Elizabeth down. They also prescribed some pills, which Rob, with honest eyes, swore to Elizabeth he would take regularly, and of course immediately forgot about them as soon as he left the house. Rob loved Elizabeth very much and was absolutely happy. Liz, as far as he could tell, was quite content with life, and would have been happy too, if not for one but. Elizabeth really wanted a child, but despite all their efforts, a baby remained just a dream for now. Liz, don't be so upset. We'll manage. What's the hurry? Rob said, sitting next to Liz on the sofa. My own parents had me when they were almost 40. And look, I turned out fine. Do you have any complaints about me? Only relevant ones, please. Jokester. Elizabeth lightly tapped her husband's head with her fist. Always joking. Well, yes. You certainly have no need to hurry. Liz shook her head sadly. You, my dear man, only men and wine get better with age. But I'm a woman, you see. I only get older with the years. Elizabeth, what nonsense! Where did you pick up such foolishness? Rob looked at Elizabeth in surprise. It's not foolishness. It's the truth, Robbie. Do you know what they call women like me in medicine if they're expecting a child? Liz looked at her husband questioningly. Elderly primigravida. She pronounced the unpleasant word clearly and smiled bitterly. So, you have everything ahead of you. But I need to get moving. And you, by the way, too. Liz shook off her despondency and, as was her custom, ended the difficult conversation with a joke. Hear that, my beloved husband. Get a move on. She jumped off the sofa and stood in front of him, fists on her hips. Robert looked at Elizabeth, girlishly slender, thin, light, with a mass of red hair that hadn't faded with age. He looked at her familiar face, looked into her eyes, in which, as one of their friends said, devils danced, and felt the familiar, demanding, irresistible desire that hadn't diminished with the years. He jumped up, grabbed his beloved, and it was as if higher powers heard this conversation. Exactly 9 months later, the elderly primigravida, Elizabeth, who had carried the entire pregnancy like a 20-year-old girl, gave birth to a boy easily and quickly. Rob, bewildered by the unusual thoughts and anxieties, held his son for the first time, looking fearfully at the pink, wrinkled face. The answer was an unexpectedly serious gaze. Redhead, the happy father breathed out. Liz, he's a redhead, just like you. He's not a redhead at all. Elizabeth took the baby from Rob, who stood awkwardly bent over, like all new fathers, afraid to move and drop the precious bundle. He's just golden, our golden boy. They named their son John. Long awaited, longed for, late, of course. He was the light in their window, a joy and a hope for his parents. Johnny grew into a healthy and intelligent boy. He didn't shine with special talents, but he studied without failing, which is to say, normally. He drew well, strummed the guitar, sat engrossed in computer games like all boys, but at least he didn't become addicted and allowed his parents to take him to the dacha with pleasure, where shashlik and pie awaited him. True, these joint family evenings and trips for 3 happened less and less often. The reason was Robert's busy work schedule, his business. By the time John turned 10, Robert Borisov was already firmly on his feet, owning several workshops and car service centers. And it all started with that very uncle's workshop, where he began working part-time from his first year at the institute. Childless, much-aged Peter, a few years after Rob graduated from the institute, completely handed over his workshop to his nephew. He did, however, bargain for the right to come at any time and, if he wished, as he put it, shake off the dust by joining in some simple repair. True, in most cases, Peter's visits amounted to discussing Robert's skill and business acumen. "Well, look at that," he would explain with pleasure and conviction to some old client or friend. "It was me who made Robbie get into all this back in the day. Without me, he'd be shuffling papers somewhere now. But with me, he became a master. And what a master. See? Honestly? He's already bought equipment there. It doesn't even fit in the premises anymore. You hear?" he tells me. "I'm opening a second workshop, Uncle Pete. I'm going to build a network of service centers. What a fool. You hear? Can you imagine how they'll tax him now? And he'll take out more loans for equipment and rent and salaries for all those loafers. Does he need that? He should sit quietly, turn his nuts and bolts for bread and caviar. He's got golden hands and a brain, God bless him. But no, he's climbing God knows where." Peter would dissolve into the cough of an old smoker, shaking his head indignantly and waving his arms, while his eyes shone with pride for his nephew. Robert's business was large and troublesome, and it demanded more and more of his time. "Rob, there's something I need to tell you. John and I have been thinking. We've talked it over, and we've decided to get a dog." Elizabeth looked carefully at her husband, who had unexpectedly stayed home that evening and hadn't rushed off somewhere as usual on an urgent call. "A dog?" Robert was shocked and indignant. "Do you have any idea what a dog is like in the house? It's noise, fuss, fur, dirt. They bring all sorts of germs into the house." He thought for a moment and added for some reason, "Fur everywhere, you understand. And the main thing, Liz, you have to walk it, the dog, every day." Elizabeth looked at Rob mockingly, and at his last sentence, she burst into cheerful laughter. "Every day, really? Is that true?" She shook her head, playfully feigning surprise. "I just don't know what to say. You've simply amazed me. Imagine, walking it every day. I always thought dogs peed once a week. You take it out, say on Tuesday, and forget about it until the next week." "Are you making fun of me?" Robert stated, looking at Elizabeth, who was shaking with quiet laughter. He generally liked dogs, but preferred to do so from a distance, abstractly, so to speak. It just so happened that he never had pets himself, neither in childhood nor in youth. True, when he was about 12, to his considerable fright, he was given an aquarium with fish, which, despite all his efforts, for some reason died quickly and quietly. Rob then felt a strange inner relief, which of course he carefully hid from his family. Owning a dog, in his understanding, was an extremely complicated matter, involving endless hassles and the necessity of doing things he absolutely didn't want to do. For example, trudging out into the rain and slush instead of lying on a comfortable sofa under a cozy, fluffy blanket and watching his favorite movie. "Why do you need this?" Robert made another attempt to influence his wife. "Why do you need a dog too? Don't you have enough worries with us?" Elizabeth looked into his eyes. "I don't have enough worries, can you imagine? And especially, I don't have enough of you." Elizabeth lowered her hands, moved away, and sat on a stool. And then she suddenly added in a completely different tone. Hearing it, Rob looked up at Elizabeth in surprise. He had never heard such a voice from her. Dry, somehow alien. "I don't understand why you're worried about the inconveniences associated with a dog. You're not even home anyway. What difference does it make to you who lives here?" He choked with indignation. And Elizabeth, without letting him object, continued. "I've wanted to talk to you for a long time, my dear. Let's talk now, since things have turned out this way. We miss you. Do you understand? Both of us. All these endless trips, business trips. You've only been coming home to sleep for a long time now. And what's more, we don't even see you at night. Do you think I don't know you've taken to sleeping on the sofa in the living room? Liz, I do that so I don't wake you up. Rob looked at his wife indignantly. He was very hurt that everything he considered his personal great sacrifice for the sake of the family was now being held against him. Liz, I work like a dog, earning money for you, you know, so you can have everything. Robert was almost shouting. I do all this for you. For you, by the way. You don't have to do it for me, Elizabeth replied quietly. Do you hear? If you want to do something for me, for John, please just be with us more often and longer. For some reason, Rob's throat tightened. Liz, I'll try, he said, and added, Forgive me, my dear. Try. I forgive you. Elizabeth looked up at him, habitually tucked a few unruly red strands behind her ears, and added mockingly, And we're getting a dog anyway. A couple of weeks later, a funny, chubby Labrador puppy, tripping over his own paws, appeared in the house. Oh, Liz, you even chose a dog like yourself, a redhead. Robert stumbled, laughing senselessly. No, what? With his eyes, the Labrador kept circling a certain coffee table with suspicious persistence. There was clearly a plastic folder with business papers within the puppy's reach, and Rob didn't like the close attention Sam, as the little hooligan was named, was paying to it. You're both somehow… well, in short, it's good with you, Rob managed to say, and immediately jumped up with a mournful cry. It took the puppy only a second to snatch the coveted folder from the table and try to disappear with it into the depths of the apartment. Even grabbed by the scruff of the neck, Sam tried to defend his prey, and the folder, finally in Rob's hands, was already considerably chewed and slobbered on. Liz, I take back my words, he shouted. With you, yes, it's good. But with this parasite, it's impossible. What a rascal. And how did he manage to chew, tear, and slobber on everything so much in a few seconds? The puppy sat behind Elizabeth's legs, with an almost human smirk on his face, and she laughed cheerfully. This was just the beginning. While Sam was growing up, Robert lost count of the ruined shoes and scratched wallpaper. And as for how many carelessly left documents the tailed shredder had ruined, it was impossible to count. At the same time, Sam persistently chose things that belonged to the head of the family. He just loves you, you see? He loves you in a special way. That's why he chooses things that are yours, that smell of you. Elizabeth laughed, comforting her husband. Well then, I should be the one to beat him? Robert joked grimly, sadly examining the latest evidence of the puppy's special love for him. And yet, Elizabeth, as always, turned out to be right. Sam became a true friend to all of them, and even brought their already happy family closer together. Everything collapsed in an instant. Liz was hit by a car driven by a drunken, snot-nosed kid. She was taken to the hospital in critical condition, where she died a few minutes later without regaining consciousness. Rob learned of Elizabeth's death by phone. They called him from her mobile. Liz, my dear. Hello, he shouted into the receiver, answering the call. Liz, listen. You're always scolding me. But imagine, I've dropped everything and bought tickets for the three of us to the sea. We're flying on Monday. Come on, arrange your vacation urgently at your hospital. Liz, Elizabeth. Hello, can you hear me? He suddenly fell silent, feeling rather than hearing the suspicious silence on the line. And suddenly, he was scared. The silence suddenly turned into something sticky and suffocating. It seemed to envelop him, making his heart beat faster and faster. "Excuse me," an unfamiliar male voice said on the phone. "Are you Robert Borisov?" "Yes," Rob rasped back, his voice suddenly hoarse. "And Elizabeth Miller? How is she related to you? Is she your spouse?" "No, she's my wife," he replied, not understanding the word spouse. What was his Elizabeth a spouse? A spouse was something big, clumsy, tiresome, like an old wardrobe. But Liz was his wife, beloved, friend, his sunshine, his happiness for life. "I'm very sorry, but I have to inform you, an accident. She died without regaining consciousness. Unfortunately, there was nothing we could do." The unfamiliar voice continued to say something, and Rob held the phone, clenching it with his fingers, trying to grasp one simple thought. Elizabeth, his wife, beloved, friend, his happiness for life, was gone. The following days passed in a haze, a fog. He went or drove somewhere, did something, responded to words, handshakes, calls from people. And he couldn't shake the feeling that it was his double doing all this, while he himself, the real Robert, watched everything from the side. He saw his double pick up Elizabeth's body from the hospital, saw how this same double sat silently next to Liz's coffin, escorted it to the cemetery, and lowered it into the grave. Then this same double returned home, walked the mournful Sam, hugged him, lay down on the sofa, and closed his eyes. The morning after the funeral, Rob was completely alone. Even that imaginary double, who had seemingly done all the hard work for him and seen Elizabeth off on her last journey, had disappeared. The morning was sunny and bright. Robert woke up to a sunbeam dancing across his face, tickling and blinding him. "Who didn't close the curtains yesterday? Some housekeeper," he muttered, getting out of bed. "My mood is awful. Maybe I didn't sleep well. And Elizabeth ran off somewhere early. I wish she'd come back soon," Rob thought lazily. "Elizabeth won't come. Never. You will never see or hear her again. Never." The thought flashed mercilessly in his head. And as if in response to this thought, something tore in his chest with unbearable pain, seemingly crushing his ribs and tearing his insides. A frightened Sam darted around his owner lying on the floor, barking softly. A frightened, sleepy John ran in at the sound of the dog's whimpering, called an ambulance, which, fortunately, arrived on time. After the heart attack, Robert, thinner and quieter, realized he would have to learn to live again, learn not to think in the mornings why Elizabeth wasn't calling them for breakfast, learn to stop waiting for weekends to rush out of town, the three of them, he, John, and Liz, with Sam in tow. Learn not to remember that he shouldn't put on this American movie because Elizabeth couldn't stand the main actor in it. He was literally going crazy from these constant, involuntary slips into the past and painful returns from there back to reality, where Liz wasn't. Having regained some strength, Robert started going not to the office, but to the car repair shop. And the old, faithful work to which he had been devoted for so many years reciprocated. It accepted him like a good friend, occupying his hands, time, and thoughts. Robert gladly put on the old oily overalls he hadn't worn for years, and, to the astonishment of the mechanics and everyone else who looked at him like a demigod, climbed into the inspection pit. At first, the service workers looked at him with surprise. They were uncomfortable in his presence. The expression in their eyes clearly read, "What whim has seized him? This is nonsense. The man has money to burn, and he's sitting under cars up to his ears in oil, bruised all his fingers, eating some rubbish. It's all unclear, strange. And anyway, he's hanging around here unnecessarily. Now we can't even sneak out for a smoke. Days went by, months passed, and he continued to work at the car repair shop for several hours a day regularly, alongside everyone else. Accustomed to the owner's presence, the workers greeted him warmly and sincerely and called him George among themselves. If, busy with his main big affairs, he suddenly didn't come to the workshop, they understood that they already missed him. "Mary, hello!" the mechanics shouted to the incredibly beautiful secretary from the central office. "Do you need the boss? He's in the third bay today." Mary habitually rushed in the indicated direction with a stack of documents. Work binges. That's what the company employees jokingly called the times when Robert disappeared into the workshop. He's gone mad. Uncle Peter, now quite old, but still involved in work matters, diagnosed Rob. "Robbie, you were a fool, and you still are, even though your head is grey now. You're the owner. What are you clanging around with metal here for?" "And what should I do? Shuffle papers?" Rob snorted. "And who taught me all my life that I should do a man's work?" "Well, I'm not going back on my words, but you, well." The uncle was clearly flustered. "It's still somehow wrong. It's because you're alone. You're lonely. That's why you're acting up. You need a woman." Peter, with his directness and spontaneity, hit the sorest spot. Robert was indeed very lonely. When Elizabeth was with him, he wasn't alone for a single second of his life. He felt they were together, even if Liz was far away. But the pain was there. His mother and Sam were, of course, nearby. But his son, his only, beloved, cherished son, did not fill the emptiness that had appeared in his father's life. Elizabeth's death, for some reason, did not bring John and Robert closer, as it seemed it should have, but on the contrary, it separated them. 16-year-old John, having grieved for his mother loudly and demonstratively, withdrew into himself, into his own world. To his father's attempts to talk, to become closer, John replied with rude frankness, "Dad, let's be honest. You can't replace Mum for me anyway, and you were always a so-so father. No, I have no questions about money and all that, no point denying it. But don't try to get inside me." Rob listened. John was quite decent, didn't demand anything extra, didn't have any bad or suspicious habits. But the feeling that he was living in the same apartment with an almost stranger, a completely unknown person, never left Robert. "He should have been beaten black and blue." Uncle Peter, as always, spoke simply and categorically. But now, what's the point? And only faithful Sam, waiting for Rob at home, exuberantly happy at his owner's arrival, reminded him of his past happy life. During one of his binge days, Rob finally kicked out the office workers who had been bothering him with various questions from the workshop and gladly immersed himself in a complex engine repair. The work completely engrossed him, and he didn't immediately notice the female voice coming from the small manager's office. "I called. You scheduled me for a repair, and now you won't take my car. This is outrageous. I won't leave on principle, do you hear?" "Hello?" Robert, wiping his hands as he went, approached the workshop manager, Gary, who was listening to the woman with a suffering expression on his face. The lady, judging by everything, was very irritated and accompanied her words with energetic gestures. "May I ask what happened?" He looked at the woman and smiled warmly. However, it wasn't difficult to smile at her sincerely. Despite her nervous state, the lady turned out to be a pretty young woman around 25 with huge grey eyes, a retroussé nose, and long, fluffy blonde bangs that she constantly blew out of her face with a funny, loud exhale. "Hello," she turned sharply to Robert. "Another specialist. Am I supposed to tell my story to everyone here? Maybe instead of chattering, One of you will get to my car. My dear girl, Robert said softly, and was inwardly very surprised by the thoughtlessly but completely sincerely spoken word. After Elizabeth's death, he had never felt anything remotely resembling emotions towards any woman. I am not your dear girl, the lady interrupted him decisively. All right, not dear. Girl. Rob didn't let himself be thrown off. Let's calm down and figure out the situation. What happened after all? Tell it again, she gasped indignantly. Gary! Robert looked questioningly at the manager standing next to him, who had been staring intently at the problem all this time. Mr. Borisov, it's simple. Gary stepped forward decisively. The woman. He glanced at the piece of paper he held in his hand. Sarah did indeed make an appointment with us, but unfortunately, she incorrectly stated the make of her car during the phone conversation. And now, everything has become clear. I tried to explain to the lady that we cannot repair her car because we don't have the equipment to repair cars of this make. She needs to go to a dealership service center. But Sarah doesn't want to listen to me. Well, there it is. Gary threw up his hands, making it clear with his whole demeanor what he thought of certain ladies who understood nothing and didn't want to listen to sensible people. Understood. Robert, having listened to Gary, shifted his gaze to the woman and smiled slightly. Sarah, I'm not mistaken. I'm afraid we really can't help you. But I'll write down an address for you now. Call there. And I think... Listen, I don't care what you think. Your sign says car service, right? She pointed expressively at her car. A car, right. So what does that mean? She looked at Rob ironically. It means you will repair it. Sarah, please understand. It's in your interest. Rob was silent for a few seconds, searching for arguments. If, God forbid, your tooth suddenly hurts, you'll go to a dentist, not an ophthalmologist, right? And if by mistake you accidentally end up at an ophthalmologist's, you won't demand that he still deal with your tooth, will you? Gary snorted, trying to suppress his laughter. What nonsense, the woman muttered, feigning inflexibility, although it was already clear that she was tired of arguing. But she decided to have the last word. Fine. I promise I won't let this go. I'll complain to your superiors. And not to some manager or some other boss. I'll complain to your owner, the proprietor, I don't know. In short, whoever is in charge here. Really, this is just unbelievable. A client arrives, and they refuse her. What kind of business is this? She looked indignantly at the workshop employees, who were now openly laughing, having started listening to the conversation and eagerly awaiting the outcome. Well, that's your right. In that case, to not put things off, allow me to introduce myself. Robert began. What do I care about you? She stamped her foot in indignation. A rather high heel twisted, the girl swayed and would have fallen if Robert hadn't caught her arm. A light, barely perceptible scent of tart perfume wafted towards him, and her silky hair brushed his cheek for a second. And suddenly, he felt excitement and surprise. He was alive again, immersed in these forgotten sensations, a little frightened by them. He didn't immediately understand what she was saying. Sarah snatched her hand, which he was still holding, away from him and said, Well, get ready. You and you. She quickly pointed a finger at Gary and Robert. I'll make sure you're fired. Is that clear? She looked back indignantly at the service mechanics, who were now openly roaring with laughter. The next day, he worked in his office at the firm's central headquarters and was hardly surprised when the door burst open and Sarah entered the room swiftly, with a stubborn expression on her face. She sat down resolutely in the chair opposite him. So, I must tell you that with employees like the ones there, You'll soon go bankrupt. I bring my car, and they refuse to take it. The model, you see, isn't the right one. They've become completely insolent, especially one older one there. Instead of doing his job, he decided to hit on me. As if I care what his name is. Go ahead and... She stopped in confusion mid-sentence with a smile, finally looking at Robert. After a few seconds, she used a gesture he was now familiar with to sweep her two long bangs from her face and smiled sheepishly. "Oh, it's you," the woman said in astonishment. "Yes, it's me. My name is Robert Borisov, and you're Sarah, I remember." He stood up from his desk and bowed gallantly. "You're a jokester. You turn out to be the owner of this establishment. But then why were you there, in the workshop, looking like that? It's strange." "Well, why strange? It's quite normal. It would be strange if I worked in the workshop in a suit." "All right, Sarah. Let's leave my strange behavior. Let's decide what we should do about you instead." "Meaning?" she asked in surprise. "Well, how? You probably understand. I cannot fulfill your demand to fire everyone, including myself," Robert said seriously. Sarah looked at him and unexpectedly burst out laughing. The laughter was so sincere and contagious that Robert couldn't help but laugh with her, easily and cheerfully, as he hadn't laughed in 2 years. "Well, yes. I suppose my complaint is hopeless," Sarah said, still sobbing from laughter. "Well, all right, Mr. Borisov. It was nice meeting you, despite everything." She got up from the chair and offered him her hand. He took the thin, narrow hand in his and involuntarily covered it with his other hand and held it. "Sarah. Sarah, forgive my boldness, but perhaps you would agree to have dinner with me, as compensation for not repairing your car. After all, I must respond to your complaint, mustn't I?" he said, amazed by his own words. Rob suddenly, for the first time since Elizabeth's death, wanted to talk to a woman, to touch her hand again, to feel the light, subtle scent of perfume with its unusual tart fragrance. For Robert, this was a completely new sensation. All his life, only 2 women had existed for him, his mother and Elizabeth. All other members of the fairer sex, even the most beautiful and intelligent, were simply people to him. He was hopelessly lost to romantic adventures. Women's charms, which had been tried on him repeatedly, simply had no effect. He loved Elizabeth, wanted to be only with her, and thoughts of experiencing any new sensations related to women simply didn't occur to him. "Well, if there's one thing I'm sure of, it's Robbie's faithfulness," Elizabeth used to laugh. "Your husband, by the way, is a catch. Where is he now? Do you even know? At work, you say?" "Oh, look out. You'll sit around in your sweatpants and someone will steal your man." "Well, if they steal him, then that's fate," Elizabeth would answer philosophically, but she was being cunning. For some reason, she was completely confident in her Robbie, and every day in his eyes, she saw that her confidence was justified. "So, do you accept the offer?" He looked into Sarah's face and smiled. "You know I do," Sarah suddenly replied. 20-year-old Sarah was charming. At the same time, she made no attempt to make any special impression on Robert, to charm or seduce him. She seemed to care nothing about whether her hair was lying right or if she had eaten all her lipstick along with her steak. By the way, Sarah had an excellent appetite, and in her company, Robert ate with genuine pleasure for the first time in 2 years. Despite the age difference of more than 20 years, they found a surprisingly large number of common topics for conversation. For example, Sarah learned about the Labrador Sam and was absolutely delighted, turning out to be an old dog person. Despite the somewhat scandalous beginning of their acquaintance, Sarah turned out to be a light-hearted, cheerful, kind person. "I don't even know what came over me," she laughed, recalling the scene she had caused at the workshop. "Honestly, I've never acted like that before. It was like I went off the rails. Please forgive me, Mr. Borisov." "But first, not Mr. Borisov, but Rob." "We agreed, Sarah," Robert gently chided her. "And second, because of your spectacular appearance, I'm glad things turned out this way." "And I'm glad, very," Sarah suddenly replied. A year later, Robert, rejuvenated, with shining eyes and straightened shoulders, sat in his office holding a small velvet box. Inside lay a magnificent ring, a ring for Sarah. "I love her. I love Sarah," he thought. "Maybe as much as Elizabeth once, or almost as much. I don't know. What's the point of comparing? I just want her to be by my side as my wife. Always. Or at least for as long as it works out." He became agitated, jumped up, and paced around the office. "Okay, what if she says yes? What if she just ignores my age, everything, and says yes? Sarah, she's like that, she might. What should I do?" Robert was afraid to voice the most important, essentially the only problem: John. Johnny and his possible reaction to all this, to Sarah, to the father who had suddenly decided to continue living, not just live out his days. "Son, I need to talk to you." Each word came out with great difficulty for Robert. He couldn't sit still, jumped up, and paced the room. He went to the window, deliberately, slowly, and neatly adjusted the fold of the curtain. Then he walked back to the armchair he had just been sitting in, sat down, but stood up again after a couple of seconds. John hadn't uttered a word the whole time, watching his father. The silence was clearly dragging on. "Dad," John finally said, "maybe you'll tell me what you wanted?" "What I wanted to say?" Robert asked senselessly, nervously straightening the perfectly ironed collar of his shirt. His hand trembled noticeably. "Johnny, well, it's hard for me to talk to you about this, but I want to be honest with you. I'm really counting on you to support and understand me. In short, I've met a woman." Rob finally said what he felt were the hardest words of his life. "She's good, smart, decent, beautiful. In short, I like her very much. And it seems, strangely enough, she likes me too. I'd like to introduce you to her." Rob mumbled, not daring to look up at his son. "What about Mom?" came from above him. "What about Mom?" "John!" He finally looked John in the eyes. "Mom is gone. She's been gone for a long time. I loved your mother very much, son. Very much. And I still love her and miss her terribly. You know that perfectly well." "Miss her? Really? Well, I'll be." John snorted ironically. "But I see that doesn't stop you from having affairs." "Don't you dare talk to me in that tone." Robert found the strength to look sternly at his son. "And choose your words, please." "Listen, father." John called him father for the first time in his life, not dad. And this unfamiliar, somehow alien, as if forged word cut unpleasantly into Robert's ears. "Maybe this is some kind of joke. You're playing a trick on me, aren't you? Come on, admit it." "No, John, I'm not playing a trick on you. This is not a joke. I really want to introduce you to Sarah. I would like to—" "I don't want to meet any Marina," the guy shouted. "Not Marina, but Sarah," Robert corrected his son. "It doesn't matter. Marina, Sarah, Karina, or even a tangerine. I don't care. I couldn't care less, you understand? Don't you dare bring her here. Got it?" John yelled. "All right then." Robert got up from the armchair and paced the room. He barely resisted the urge to slap his son. Let me remind you that this is my apartment, and I will decide what I do, both now and later. Do you hear me? He looked at John. And if you don't like something, well, let's decide. Are we going to live together or not? Robert's voice didn't tremble and didn't betray the turmoil raging in his soul and head. It seemed he managed to appear decisive and firm, because John stopped shouting and watched his father silently and attentively, and then he suddenly blurted out, "Are you really going to kick me out of the house because of some—" "Careful, John," Robert interrupted his son sharply. "Careful. Think before you say something that can never be forgiven or fixed." "Dad, what are you doing? You're already over 50, and your heart is acting up." John had evidently changed tactics and brought out the heaviest, most ruthless arguments. "What kind of courting can there be at your age? It's time for you to retire, to think about your pension. And suddenly you've decided to start courting women in your old age." John almost screamed, having completely crossed all boundaries. Robert listened to his son's hysterical shouts. Of course, John, overwhelmed by resentment and jealousy towards a strange woman, was clearly overdoing it, with the maximalism with which 16-year-olds judge older generations. The guy was talking utter nonsense. And yet, Robert clearly understood the wall of rejection and misunderstanding he was about to face. Lord, what am I doing? Robert suddenly thought clearly, continuing to listen to John's screams. What am I doing? She's half my age. And Johnny's reaction. It's typical. Everyone will think the same, even if they don't say it. Absolutely everyone. Yes, yes, of course, I'll marry you, Robbie, Sarah exclaimed with delight, ignoring modesty. I really want to be your wife. Thank you, Sarah. I'm so happy. Only forgive me. We need to talk. He struggled to choose and force out the words, although he had rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in his mind. Sarah, you see, I'm, to put it mildly, not a young man, he mumbled. I understand perfectly, perfectly. I'm not a girl either, Sarah snorted. Sarah, my dear, but you know what I'm talking about, don't you? He sighed painfully. Yes, I know, of course. Her voice became hard. You are significantly older, and I am unforgivably young. And I'm marrying you solely for your money, to take everything you have and run off abroad with a young lover. Oh, and another thing. You have a bad heart. I can take advantage of that, finish you off, and voila. I'm the heir to everything. They will definitely tell you all this many times. Sarah, he exclaimed. No, let's talk. Let's say all this nasty stuff out loud. I know all this perfectly well, Rob. And I also know that you are ruining everything right now. You are ruining, perhaps, the happiest moment of my life. Robbie, my darling, my dear, let's do this. Sarah wiped away her tears, lifted her face, and looked him intently in the eyes. Either you believe me completely and entirely, in my sincerity, in my feelings for you, or right now we say goodbye to each other. He looked into her eyes and believed, once and for all. At least, at that moment, he thought it was forever. Sarah moved into their large apartment, and by that time, John, a second-year student, was living in a dormitory. The relationship between John and Sarah, despite all of Robert's hopes, was, to put it mildly, separate. Robert and Sarah and John. Even more unclear and unpredictable. Something was clearly happening between him and Sarah, and Robert tried many times to find out what exactly. John, what's going on? Listen, Father, I'm a man. You yourself pointed that out to me recently. Yes, I helped. His son snorted ironically. Well, actually, you created this problem yourself. You're talking about Sarah. I'm talking about my life. That's it. Leave me alone. His son cut him off. John, don't you dare talk to me like that. His father tried to call his son to order and immediately gave up. Johnny, how about I buy you an apartment? Having gotten nowhere with John, he tried a different approach. Sarah, we need to talk. What's happening between you and John? My dear, I won't say everything is perfect, but basically nothing too terrible. It's a typical stepmother and stepson story. Well, you know, stepmothers are never good, but I'm trying very hard. And anyway, she hesitated. Robert felt that something very important was hidden behind John's aggression and Sarah's playfulness. And this something didn't let Robert live in peace. It bothered him like a sore tooth. And so he sat on the bench in the park, stroked Sam's golden ears, and wondered what to do. How to understand what was happening in his house. And if he did hear something resembling the truth from one of them, he simply wouldn't have the courage to believe it. He had to see and understand everything himself, on his own. And he would have to do it without his son's and wife's knowledge, no matter how disgusting it felt to secretly spy on them. Michael, hello? Robert dialed his deputy's number. Can you please give me the phone number of the company that installed our video surveillance system? The next day, a quick-witted young man taught Robert the intricacies of surveillance. The camera is tiny. You can install it anywhere. Better higher up, so they don't accidentally bump into it. He lowered his voice mysteriously. There's no sound, but the image will be top quality at any distance. The company guarantees it. Having installed the camera in the living room of the apartment, Robert went to work, sank tiredly into the armchair in his office, and turned on his laptop. There was no sound, but the image was clear, just as the technician had promised. John was the first to come home. He wandered around the apartment, then returned to the living room and settled directly opposite the camera, turning on the huge wall-sized TV. The guy sat on the sofa in a relaxed, casual pose. Alone in the apartment, he had no need to play the role of the offended or deprived. His face, so similar to Elizabeth's face, so familiar and dear, caused Robert, watching the monitor, a pang of aching, sharp love for his son. He desperately wanted to drop everything, run home, grab this long-legged, tousle-haired, snub-nosed creature, his Johnny, and hug him tightly. To ask forgiveness for everything he had done and not done, to say how much he loved his son. Lost in his feelings, Robert didn't immediately realize that something was happening in the apartment. John's posture had changed. He still remained on the sofa, but he was all tensed up, as if bristling. His face had taken on its usual grim, angry grimace. Instead of the sweet, nice Johnny, a copy of Liz, a wary, angular guy sat on the sofa, radiating anxiety and aggression. Sarah entered the room. Judging by the movement of their lips, they were talking. Sarah smiled slightly, apparently asking John something. He, lounging further on the sofa and putting his feet up on the glass table, put on a crooked smirk and evidently replied, squinting and barely parting his lips. Sarah turned and left the room. Robert couldn't hear what they were saying, but one thing was obvious. John was not at all like an unhappy outcast with an evil, suffering stepmother. And Sarah clearly hadn't turned into a fury in her husband's absence. Rather, it seemed that John was behaving in his usual rude manner, and Sarah was trying to smooth things over with patience and calmness. Robert, not knowing why, continued to watch his son sitting in the living room. John suddenly looked in the direction Sarah had left, stood up, and with cautious movements, clearly trying not to make noise, moved towards his father's office. Having disappeared from the frame, he reappeared on the monitor a couple of minutes later. One hand was shoved into his jeans pocket, and it looked very much like he had just put something in there. His chest ached on the left side, the familiar dull pain. Robert gasped. At that moment, he suddenly felt like an ancient old man who didn't even have the strength to move his legs. So John had betrayed him after all. John, not Sarah. John was tormenting Sarah and, it seemed, was quietly taking money from the safe in the office. Well, at least that was quite easy to find out. That same evening, upon returning home, Robert discovered that a rather significant amount had dwindled considerably in the few weeks he hadn't looked in his safe. He didn't talk to his son, but simply waited, not knowing what for. And he waited. A few days later, he saw John carry a small rectangular box out of the office, which contained Elizabeth's few but expensive pieces of jewellery that Rob had given her. Elizabeth loved wearing jewellery and called it our diamond fund. "I need to talk to you," Robert said the next evening. "Well?" John snapped back habitually. "Money has started disappearing from the house, and not just money." To John's credit, he tried his best to appear calm and indifferent, but he didn't do a good job of it. "Why are you so sure I took the money?" John smiled awkwardly, or rather bared his teeth, hiding his fear behind it all. "There's another person in our apartment, a complete stranger, by the way. Maybe we should ask her? Maybe our young wife doesn't have enough?" "All right, then." Robert ground out the words through his teeth, feeling the familiar dull pain in his chest. "The money, of course. If it's still intact, you can keep. Give me back the jewellery and get out." John left the room. A few minutes later, he returned. "Here's all your money." He threw the wallet at his father's feet. "I didn't take a single ruble. You can count it. But I won't give you the jewellery. They'll be kept by me. You can call and file a theft report. I don't care. I won't give them up, even if they put me in prison. These are Mum's jewels. I won't allow some strange woman to wear them. Do you hear?" By the end of the sentence, John's voice, trembling more and more, finally broke, and the guy, unable to bear it, sobbed. Robert stared at his son with wide eyes. It was as if the shell of bitterness, cynicism, and lies peeled away from John before his eyes. Standing before him was his beloved, only son, his and Elizabeth's, their golden boy, confused and lost in his fantasies and delusions, but still his own Johnny, still hopelessly missing his mother, and having driven that longing so deep inside himself that it had turned into hatred. Hatred towards his father, Sarah, towards the whole world where his mother wasn't. "Johnny, forgive me," Robert said quietly. John lifted his tear-streaked face to his father and said softly, in a barely audible whisper, "And you forgive me, Dad. Forgive me for this. And for Sarah. I love you, Dad." Robert took a few steps and squeezed his son's outstretched hand with all his might. And around them, jumping, barking happily and shining with golden fur, not knowing what he was so happy about, was Sam.